Good morning, everyone. Archbishop Richard Gagnon here, and this is our Friday morning report. Thank you very much for joining us today. And as we now see a change in our weather, things are looking up. I've noticed driving to the office this morning that I'm seeing more and more curbs on the side of the road as the snow melts. That's a very positive sign. So tomorrow on Saturday, it's February the 11th on Saturday, which is the World Day of the Sick. I just want to draw your attention to that. It's also the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. And in the Ordo, which is the liturgical guideline that we renew every year in the Catholic Church to help us with the celebration of the liturgy, it talks about the World Day of the Sick this way. It says, the ministry of Jesus to the sick is central to the life of the Church. February the 11th is the memorial of Our Lady of Lourdes, highlights the healing ministry of the Church. It reminds us that service to the sick and suffering cannot be neglected. It recognizes the great efforts of doctors, nurses, healthcare institutions, and pastoral care givers to restore health and those afflicted with illness and disease. And so we want to make sure that we pray on February the 11th and beyond for those who are working with the sick, who are in the medical field at all different levels, caring for the sick. That's a very important work of the Church, and Pope Francis has called the Church a field hospital. The Church's role in healing is very important. We fail at that sometimes, but when you look at all the wonderful efforts that are being done by members of the Church in the area of healing, we must be thankful to Almighty God. And I want to add to that, there are many very good and effective medical workers outside the Catholic Church who also, whether they know it or not, are participating in the healing and loving ministry of Jesus Christ. So this morning on that theme, on this Friday morning report, for the next 2 weeks, including today, we want to kind of delve into a couple of interviews with interesting people. I call them people of interest. Now, in law, if you're a person of interest, it's not a good thing to be called. We know that. But there are people who are of interest to us. Next week, we'll speak about a particular work, a book written by a woman living in Malaysia. And we'll speak to her from Malaysia about her work on Mary. Very interesting. But today, we have a very special guest that I interviewed just a little earlier today. And her name is Angelina Ireland. And Angelina Ireland was an important part of the story of the Delta Hospice in British Columbia. And she speaks to us this morning from British Columbia about the unfortunate connection today between palliative care and MAID and the problems therein and the struggles that the Delta Hospice Society has experienced. What we will talk about this morning is a little hard-hitting, but it's direct and it's important information for us to know. So I'll turn now to that interview with Angelina. Well, good morning, Angelina. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on this Friday report. You know, it's February the 11th, and that is the World Day of the Sick. And so I think it's a very significant day to be chatting with you about a very important issue that has to do with end of life and the reality of MAID in our society. So thank you for coming on. And we're going to discuss this morning a little bit about your experience with the issues around the Delta Hospice that many of our people in Manitoba have heard about, but you can help to clarify that for us, and it's good for our education. So this morning, for those that are listening to the Friday morning report, I'm speaking with Angelina Ireland, and Angelina came to the Delta Hospice Society in 2014 as a client, navigating her own personal cancer journey in her own life. And once she eventually recovered to good health, thanks be to God, she joined the board of directors in 2018 as a patient and then as a member of the board, which is a very interesting perspective you have. The Delta Hospice Society, which by the way is in British Columbia, not too far from Vancouver, holds a special place in her heart. With a background in accounting and as an entrepreneur, Angelina takes a solutions-oriented approach to help lead the Delta Hospice Society's important work. And she considers it a great honor to support the mandate of authentic palliative care, underlining authentic, very important word, and act as an advocate, spokesperson, and defender of traditional end-of-life values. So I'm much appreciative, and so are the people here in Manitoba, of your presence today. And before we dig quickly into the question of Delta Hospice, because it's a very interesting story, I'll take 3 minutes just to orient our people to some of the recent issues in British Columbia, which are not far different than in Manitoba. Then we'll dig right into the story of Delta. So our people hopefully remember that MAID, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, was legalized in 2016. And then in 2021, the boundaries were expanded to include people who did not have irremediable medical conditions. And having said that, there was a very interesting investigation held by the British BC Catholic newspaper, which is the largest newspaper in BC, asking for information from the Fraser Health Authority about what's going on within the medical establishment relative to MAID, because many reports were coming from patients and others who were very dissatisfied and worried about the presence of MAID in medical facilities in British Columbia. And I think the controversy around Delta Hospice also was part of that. Unfortunately, it took a very long time for this, under the Freedom of Information Act, to get any information from the Fraser Health Authority at all. And when it did come through, after about a year and a half later, it was heavily redacted. We know that a number of prominent individuals have resigned their positions with regards to hospices in British Columbia. I'm thinking of Dr. Kevin Sclatter, who worked at the Port Moody Hospice. I think it was called Crossroads. And this is what he said. He said, Fraser Valley Health's secrecy results from the obvious philosophical disconnect between palliative care and the woke agenda of including MAID as an end-of-life option. A really perplexing situation. And there's also a Dr. Neil Hilliard, who was very prominent in the BC medical establishment. He resigned 2017, a year after the legalization of euthanasia, after the board for Fraser Health Authority mandated that the authority's senior leadership had to support its policy of MAID in hospice. And so hospice, palliative care, must also have MAID as an option. And that has been the cause of a great deal of angst in that particular area relative to MAID. And we know that there's also a certain amount of international scrutiny of the very liberal laws regarding euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide in Canada. It's very liberal in our country, perhaps the most liberal system in the world. And there's a certain amount of international scrutiny with regards to that. So having said that, and there's other issues as well lately. For example, Canadians are seeking sometimes assisted suicide due to poverty, homelessness, and mental anguish, as opposed to the original concept for people who had very painful lives and sought some kind of remedy from that by going to MAID. So the whole area is opening up, and now mental illness is becoming a topic of concern, and the federal government is seeking ways whereby people with mental illness may qualify to receive MAID. And there's a pause on that right now, but the conversation continues in Canada. So there's a widening up there of the qualifications for people who are seeking euthanasia, who are seeking physician-assisted suicide. So in the middle of this very complicated situation, we have an interesting reality, Angelina, that you have been associated with, and that is the Delta Hospice Society. So perhaps you can share with us a little bit about what happened, what went wrong, and then we'll follow that up with what's going on currently.
Right. Well, thank you, first of all, Your Grace, for having me this morning. I appreciate it. As a fellow practicing Catholic, it is always my pleasure to be able to speak to, my brothers and sisters out there. The Delta Hospice Society is a 30-year palliative care organization. And we have been always working for the advocacy of palliative care, support, and getting the message out about what palliative care really is. And what everybody needs to understand is that palliative care is a 50-year medical discipline, which does not include killing its patients.
Right.
So the Delta Hospice Society fundraised about $9 million over the course of a few years to build a hospice. And so when we had that money, we got into a lease with the Fraser Health Authority. And that lease was for 35 years. Upon that property that we leased, now this isn't just a license, this is a proper lease at the Land Titles Office with all of the, bells and whistles that are associated with such a thing. Upon that land, we built two beautiful buildings, a hospice 10-bed palliative care facility and a supportive care center, which was 7,500 square feet. So we really truly had a beautiful gem of a facility institution.
Yes, I remember. I've seen it, and Angelina's speaking to us right now from Vancouver. So I've seen that facility. Thank you.
Yes, it truly was a flagship of hospices in this country. In terms of everything was state of the art. Now, we have operated that hospice for 10 years with a contract that we had with the Fraser Health Authority. And that contract was to provide 10 palliative care beds within our hospice, basically to the public healthcare system. Now, I must stress to you that this public-private partnership, if you will, was very beneficial to the public healthcare system, because over the years, the Delta Hospice Society, put in about $22 million into the public healthcare system, 750,000 volunteer hours into the healthcare system. So you see, it was beneficial to the people and to the taxpayer. Now, when MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying, became law under Bill C-7, the federal government amended the criminal code so that euthanasia became a non-culpable homicide. That doctors and nurses would not be charged with murder for assisting people in their death. Now, the federal government pushed this down upon the provinces because the provinces have the jurisdiction for healthcare.
Right.
So now I must say that British Columbia took this with a great deal of enthusiasm, and really wanted to implement this euthanasia, call it MAID, within the medical healthcare system. And so as it came down the line, the Fraser Health Authority, there's about 5 or 6 health authorities in British Columbia. The Fraser Health Authority came to us and said, because we have a contract with the government, we will now have to provide euthanasia inside of our hospice. Now, because we are a very committed palliative care organization, we said no, because palliative care does not include killing our patients. So the government and the health authority really did not appreciate our position, and so they canceled our contract. So we lost the contract, about $1.5 million a year, to provide those 10 palliative care beds. Now, that in itself was actually I'm going to say was okay with us, because we would just therefore fundraise the money that we needed to operate our hospice. Besides that, we have a revenue producing business in Tsawwassen where we earn revenue. That money would certainly be put into the hospice. So you see, we didn't believe that we were dependent upon the government's money
Right.
in order to operate our hospice.
Okay.
So then again, the government didn't take too kindly to that. Our health minister, Adrian Dix, went out and publicly tried to shame us and said that, our position would not be tolerated.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, then they chose to cancel our lease. And you see, at that point, we had 20 years left on that lease.
Right.
So the government canceled our lease
Mm-hmm.
and then expropriated the buildings upon that property.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, those buildings, not like something you can just pick up and take along with you somewhere else, right? So they consider those buildings to be fixtures to the land, and they were just going to confiscate them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about $8 million worth of assets.
Right.
So they gave us 30 days notice to basically get out.
Mm-hmm.
Our patients that were in the hospice were all given basically eviction notices. And we're talking about dying people in their beds. And they said that, they gave it to them in January of 21. And by March, they said everybody has to be out. Now, since that, in that period, a couple of people passed away, and the remaining number were sent off to another hospice, just packed up and off they went to another hospice in the Fraser Health Authority region. And come March, they closed the door. We were banished. Our buildings were expropriated. And they reopened that hospice 2 weeks later under the authority and operation of the Fraser Health Authority, and they now provide euthanasia there.
Right. Is it under the same name?
Yes. Yes, it is. So the organization, the Delta Hospice Society, still operates. We still flourish. In fact, we have some sizable assets of our own. Mm-hmm. And so we continue, but our hospice, our building,
yes,
has been taken from us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have not been allowed to, have another hospice.
I see. So, and then we're going to go on here in a little bit more to find out what you're currently doing. But going back to this very, obviously the Delta Hospice has become a flashpoint in the viewpoint of the government. A point in which that challenges them. And so you entered into a legal process, I would imagine, in this whole thing, and you were unsuccessful legally. Is that correct? That
we've had a number of battles, to be honest, Your Grace. We have had to have battle over our organization itself, because of course our organization has assets, property, and a national voice when it comes to speaking about what authentic palliative care is, and not including killing our patients. So, we were under assault by a national interest group, and that got into, I would say, cahoots with a local activist group to try to take the organization from us. Uh-huh. And that was the most really, truly bitter and ugly battle, which ended up in the court. Mm-hmm. And so the organization was actually put under court supervision, because, many of our members are Christian. Mm-hmm. And, we saw from that battle a true attack upon our values and our beliefs. Mm-hmm. And they tried to make it very personal, particularly with me, in terms of trying to discredit anything that I might say about palliative care, because I happen to be a Christian. So, that battle lasted about a year and a half through the courts. And ultimately, at the last AGM, we have thousands of members that came to support us in our fight. And we were able to change our constitution and bylaws to prohibit any activity with euthanasia at all within our organization.
Mhm.
So, that was a victory for us, and that we were able to hold on to the organization. So we did not fight the government in court, but we had so many other issues to fight. But
Yes.
we felt that fighting the government in court would not be a good use of our resources,
Yes. Yes.
because they pretty much had it tied up with the legal contract that we had signed about 10 years ago.
Right.
And we didn't want to somehow have the justice system legitimize what they had just done to us, because it was wrong. We should never have been forced to try to kill our patients, given that we are a palliative care organization. So they took our property and our assets, but still we were able to live another day and to fight for authentic palliative care.
That's really interesting, and I know I can tell by your voice. You're very much very passionate about this, and so should we all be. The issue of angst or dissatisfaction or being troubled at heart within the palliative care community is not unique to the experience at Delta. It's in many places in this country. It's not spoken up very much, but at the grassroots level, when you talk to people in the medical establishment, you talk to nurses and doctors, there's a great deal of unhappiness about this whole issue of joining palliative care to physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. The two things are contradictory. And I think one of the values of this discussion this morning is to raise that issue up. It's the same problem in Manitoba. It's right across the country, and this is a big trouble, a big problem. And you have bravely faced this. And I can tell by your voice, you speak about MAID in very direct terms. Well, you're telling it like it is. Medical assistance in dying. Medical assistance in dying actually is a description of palliative care. People that are dying, they're being assisted in that process. It's not about ending a person's life. It's about helping a person at that very important stage of their life. And so, but you're speaking very directly, and that raises a lot of hackles in there. So, and I thank you for your strength and
well, I do have a great deal of candor, I must admit, because I have been on the other side. I have been the patient.
Yes.
I have been the vulnerable one.
Mm-hmm.
And had it not been for people to advocate on my behalf,
right?
Who knows? I mean, that is the most vulnerable any person ever is when they're sick.
Yeah.
So we do need people, to be their strength, and to honestly try to work in their best interests. But we find in Canada a coercive makeover, which is happening in the palliative care field. Mm-hmm. There is nothing compatible between euthanasia and palliative care, because palliative care is life affirming.
Yes.
Right. And there's a tremendous amount of information and mastery within that medical discipline to help people to relieve their suffering and to give them the best possible experience until their natural end. But only about 30% of Canadians have access to, this medical wonder. And that's a problem.
I wonder what percentage of Canadians have access to MAID?
Well, 100%, because now MAID is a right. Mm-hmm. Palliative care is not a right in this country, but to kill yourself is a right.
Yeah.
So 100% of people, and those numbers grow exponentially year after year.
They are growing. I've seen the stats. It's incredible what's going on, actually. I'm really interested now in how you are functioning now with the Delta Hospice Society. You say you're functioning and you're doing things, and there's a great deal of flexibility in that, creativity in what's happening here. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening there?
Yeah. So ultimately we are concerned about what's happening with palliative care in Canada, and what we see as the pressure that people are facing when they get into the medical system.
Yes.
So we have developed what we call a DNE, a Do Not Euthanize Advance Directive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we give to our members. And it is a legal document that we had a lawyer produce. And we have one for every province in Canada. And what it says basically is that we will not be euthanized. We will do not talk about MAID to me. And they have it's a long document, a number of clauses. But basically, we provide this to our members that they can take this with them if they end up in a hospital or a long-term care facility or a hospice. And basically, it is for their protection. So, doctors now are very liberal in handing out their DNR, do not resuscitate. So this is the answer to the DNR. This is a DNE.
Does it work like this is being generated from the Delta Hospice Society? Does it work outside the boundaries of British Columbia?
Yes, we have one for every province. Okay. So whatever province you live in, you just send us an email and we'll send it to you for whatever province you're in. Mm-hmm. And yes, we have one for everything, including the territories.
Okay.
Yes, so that's our number one, right? Yes. We have to try to protect people. Number two is we are in the midst of developing a program that we call Guardian Angels.
Uh-huh.
And this is a health advocate program where we will basically match angels or advocates who have the strength and the ability to, be with people who, when they're ill, to help them speak to their doctors, to help, navigate them through the system. So they don't feel like they are at the mercy of a system that they feel really just wants to MAID them. Because there's lots and lots of money now for MAID and for MAID teams who will even do house calls to kill you, right? But there's really no new funding for palliative care. Mm-hmm. There's no new funding or support for organizations who want to provide palliative care. So the government wants to have a monopoly on the patient. They want to provide everything for them. They want to push out any of these public-private partnerships that have actually been beneficial in the past, and they want to provide all the services. So, our answer to that is that's great. You provide all the services, but just make sure that you do it properly. And right, so we expect you to provide palliative care, and our angels will be out there, coupled with people to ensure that they are receiving the palliative care they deserve. Mm-hmm. And number three, Your Grace, is that, we need sanctuaries for the dying in this country.
Uh-huh.
The Delta Hospice Society's hospice was one of the last standing in British Columbia that refused to provide euthanasia. There's very, very few, if any, left. Mm-hmm. If you go into your community anywhere in this country and you ask the hospice, and you provide MAID, I would say 9 out of 10, they're going to say yes.
Yes, and I've already referred to the fact that there's a lot of angst within those communities because of that.
So, we need places. We need our own spaces. We need safe spaces for our constituency that does not want to have anything to do with MAID.
So on that note, and that's very interesting, Angelina, with the present regime where you have a right to access medically assisted suicide and euthanasia, and the proactivity of government to do that, within that regime, that legal regime, how can one establish a sanctuary for the dying without being forced to also say you should be doing MAID too?
That's right.
How do you do it?
How? Exactly. Okay. So what we need is jurisdictions, communities that will, first of all, want a sanctuary, and number two, will protect a sanctuary. And we need cooperation from the government. I mean, why is it that, we would consider that we have a large constituency that wants our services.
Mm-hmm.
If we're equal in Canada and we're all taxpayers, why can't we have an organization or a place for our people? I think that everybody who wants MAID can certainly have it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking for spaces, and we do ask the government that they have mercy and that they allow us. We're not even looking for their money. That's the funny part.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking for government money. All we're looking for is government tolerance.
Mm-hmm. Now we've got charter rights involved with this as well. You've got freedom of religion in this country, and freedom of religion goes beyond just freedom of worship. And so people to live the Christian lifestyle, that's a charter right as well. That's also involved in this idea.
It's true, because we notice that many people who want palliative care, authentic palliative care, that believe in the sanctity of life, do happen to be people of faith,
and not necessarily only Christian. There's other religions that also have a similar approach to these things,
right.
not insignificant numbers either.
Exactly. So we believe that we would have enough support from people to be able to operate such sanctuaries across the country. And quite frankly, outside of just ideology, there is no reason why the government cannot allow us to just operate such a place.
Yes, this is worth further discussion. This is a very interesting concept you're speaking about here, Angelina. I thank you for that. I'd like to really, though, at this point, taking all this information, and for many people, it's new information. With your experience, you've been a patient and you've been on the board and heavily involved in this issue with MAID relative to palliative care. So what words of advice do you have for people who are both troubled by MAID, and there are many of them, even though unfortunately in the media, these voices are not being heard. At the grassroots, there are many of them. People that are troubled with MAID, and those people who are, quite frankly, rather ignorant about the whole question. What advice might you give this morning?
To all of my brothers and sisters out there, I want you to call your local hospice, and I want you to ask that question. You kill your patients? Because first of all, we need to get to the point where people have an awareness and an understanding of what's actually going on. First of all. And second of all, we need to come together. I ask you to check out our website, deltahospicesociety.org.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking for property. This has to be a private property. We are looking to establish such a sanctuary. So, we need to, first of all, raise awareness, and then let's connect. Let's connect and share what can be done. I think all it takes is, just a willing community to sponsor us. And we would like to build a hospice somewhere in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And we will call it a sanctuary.
I was going to ask you that question. What would you call it? But it's interesting because the current federal government a couple of years ago did say that there's need for further expansion of palliative care. Nothing has happened following up on that because, as you say, 30% of Canadians have access to palliative care, and it becomes really problematic in the rural areas for sure. And so on one hand, we have a promise of expansion of palliative care. On the other hand, we have an idea that's come forth from the Delta Hospice Society of doing precisely that. Right?
Yes.
MAID expansion is happening, and it's got the legal framework behind it. But the palliative care, is kind of stuck. And there's a great constituency who really believe that palliative care should be what it was originally instituted to be. a place where people spend the most important time of their lives, the last period of their lives, in a way that is a quality life, a way in which helps them to make that important passage to the next life.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
I say, well, listen, we're always talking about diversity and inclusion. Well, we want to be included. We're diverse in our thought, and we want to be included. And I think there's enough of us around this country where we're not even asking for any money. We can do it ourselves. Let us in, right? Let us be part of society.
Well, great. A lot to chew on this morning, Angelina. Thank you for your, I'd say, very positive outlook. In spite of the troubles, you are determined to move in a direction that many people can believe in and accept, that this is needed in our country. And for the sake of diversity, to use that term, there needs to be an alternate way. And because hearts are troubled and people are very, very filled with an anxiety over this whole question of coupling palliative care with MAID. And so I think this morning was very helpful, and it's given us something to think about. And we'll see where we go from here. So, Angela, thank you for getting up so early this morning in Vancouver to be with us in the Friday Report. And by the way, Angelina is from Winnipeg, and I'm from Vancouver, and our roles are switched here this morning. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Grace. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Well, I hope you found that of interest, and what they're doing in the Delta Hospice Society in British Columbia. Angelina has given us a lot to think about, and hopefully this discussion this morning will ignite and stimulate further thinking on what we can do as Canadian citizens relative to this question of MAID, and not to become complacent about that question. So I'm very thankful for her making the time this morning to speak with us. The Lord be with all of you and your families, and protect you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.